What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here, PackersNews.com. I'm here with Pete Dougherty of the Green Bay Press-Gazette. Pete, Morgan Burnett out the door, yet another piece of the puzzle as far as the secondary goes, subtracted from the equation. I know you wrote on Packers News about the pass rush being able to help possibly mask deficiencies in the secondary. Clearly, that's a model that Philadelphia rode all the way to the championship, but you look at the Packers' pass rush the last few years, it's been maybe not non-existent, but definitely middling. What
Yeah,
do you think the way forward here is for Brian Gutekunst, and how much of this is him trying to rebuild a defense on the fly?
yeah. I'm not sure where they go from here because the one thing was, in free agency, you at least had corners. I'm not saying they were all really good or great corners, but they weren't bad, and there was a lot of them. You never find pass rushers in free agency, almost never,
Right.
and so I don't know. Wilkerson should help them some. I'm starting to wonder if they think they can play Wilkerson and Daniels and Kenny Clark together some on passing downs. That's a lot of 300-pound guys, but maybe they think they'll get a little rush out of that. But I think the only way they're gonna improve their rush is by drafting a pass rusher or two. Um, so I thought they'd go corner in free agency because that's where the guys were available, but they haven't done much. I'm sure they're still going to have to sign a guy or two, but it's not going to be, the mid to upper level guys that were available early in free agency.
Right.
Um, so they've got a lot of work to do, and I'm not, it's gonna be draft, and you still wonder maybe they've got a trade up their sleeves or something, but there's been a lot more of those this year. But I mean, they've got to have some kind of plan. I mean, they're not just winging it, I'm sure.
Well, that's the next question. How much of this do you think? I mean, you talk about passing on. I mean, pretty much the entire first wave of free agency when it comes to the cornerback spot. How much of this do you think is by design? Is it just Gutekunst kind of weighing market value versus what he has on hand or what he thinks he has on hand when it comes to unproven talent? And how much of it is maybe they were concentrated on Jimmy Graham and Muhammad Wilkerson and thought, okay, we'll get a guy. They were interested in Rashad Melvin, Rashad Breeland, who's still available. But, and how much of that was all these guys went really quickly? It was a day there where I think 6 or 7 of the top corners in free agency went off the board in a few hours. How much of that do you think maybe caught them by surprise?
It must have a little bit because that did happen really fast. You remember that? They were just
Yeah,
bang, bang, bang. Every time you refresh Twitter, there was
right.
another guy getting
Off
signed.
the board, right.
And I'm guessing what happened was that the money was just higher than they thought for those guys, so they just said move on to the next one, and boom, the next one's gone, the next one's gone. So that it must have been that the Fuller move did feel a little desperate because
Reactionary, right?
they did not structure that contract in any way that the Bears remotely couldn't match.
Right.
I mean, that was an easy match for them, and it took them what, a nanosecond to do it.
In the scheme of things, exactly. And that's my question. How much of that transaction was honestly trying to acquire the player, and how much of it was just trying to mess with the Bears? Because if they just wanted to, like, kind of, I guess, play some games financially, etc., I guess they succeeded in that regard. Although, like you say, it didn't take long to come back and match it. If the actual idea was to try and get the player, they didn't make much of an effort.
Yeah, and look, I may be naive to these things, but I would think it's mostly a waste of time to just try to mess with your opponent like that. Because what if they don't match? Then you have to pay the contract then. So it's got to be something you're willing to pay.
Right.
And it's just, you looked at the structure of that thing. And the Bears, even with all their signings, they had a lot of cap room. So I'm sure that was a no-brainer for them. I mean, they plan out all these scenarios, and I'm sure they have a last ditch scenario. And there's going to be some guys that they can sign. Maybe Breeland in a couple months they'll be able to get because he didn't pass his physical because of that foot infection.
Right.
But they're not going to. I don't see how they're going to have a strong cornerback crew this year. I just don't see how they can do it with what's available unless there's a nice trade they can pull off that would be the equivalent of kind of the Al Harris deal in '03.
Right. Which ultimately cost them a second round pick. The Packers have picks to spare this year, so maybe that is an avenue that they'll explore. We'll find out as the offseason unfolds. Make sure you're checking PackersNews.com for all the latest. For Pete, I'm Aaron. We'll talk to you soon.